Welcome, everyone. Today we are diving into the life of one of the most influential and controversial figures in history, Karl Marx. Friends, stay tuned by liking, subscribing, and sharing. Okay, it's not too late. Let's get started. To millions, he was a hero, a revolutionary thinker who fought for the rights of workers and the oppressed. To millions of others, he was a villain, the father of dangerous ideas that led to revolutions, conflicts, and political upheaval. But one thing is certain: Karl Marx changed the world forever. He is considered one of the most influential philosophers in the world, even more than Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton, in terms of shaping human society. Why? Because his ideas didn't just stay in books. They led to real changes, political revolutions, economic shifts, and movements that still exist today. To understand his story, you have to understand his struggles, his thoughts, and his vision for society. And trust me, this is not just history. His ideas affect your life more than you realize. This is why you must watch the full story. By the end, you will not only understand Karl Marx, but also see the world in a way you never imagined. Get ready to learn something that might change the way you think about your own life. This story will not only teach you about Karl Marx, but also improve your spoken English. As you listen, you'll learn new words, sentence structures, and how to express complex ideas clearly. Karl Marx was born on May 5, 1818, in Trier, Germany. At that time, Germany was not a single country as it is today. It was made up of different small kingdoms and states under the control of the Prussian Empire. His father, Heinrich Marx, was a successful lawyer, and his mother, Henriette Presburg, came from a wealthy family. Marx's family was originally Jewish, but his father converted to Christianity to avoid discrimination, as Jews faced many restrictions in Prussia. From an early age, Karl showed great intelligence and curiosity. He was an excellent student, especially in literature and philosophy. His father hoped that Karl would become a lawyer just like him and lead a successful, stable life. But Karl had different dreams. He was fascinated by history, politics, and the power of ideas. At the age of 17, Karl Marx joined the University of Bonn to study law. But instead of focusing on his studies, he spent most of his time drinking, partying, and even getting into duels, yes, actual sword fights. This worried his father, who then sent him to a more serious university, the University of Berlin. It was in Berlin that Marx's life changed forever. He became deeply interested in philosophy and politics. He was influenced by a famous philosopher, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, whose ideas shaped Marx's way of thinking. Hegel believed that history was always changing through conflicts. Fights another idea, and a new idea is born from this struggle. This inspired Marx to think deeply about society, class struggles, and power. During this time, Marx became part of a group called the Young Hegelians, a radical group that questioned everything: religion, government, and the way society was structured. He started writing essays criticizing the government and religion, which made him a troublemaker in the eyes of the authorities. While studying in Berlin, Karl Marx fell in love with Jenny von Westphalen, a woman from a rich aristocratic family. Jenny was 4 years older than Karl and belonged to a completely different social class. But despite their differences, they loved each other deeply. Jenny believed in Karl's ideas and supported him, even when it meant going against her family. They got engaged in 1836, but their love story was not an easy one. Marx's political beliefs and financial struggles would make their life extremely difficult. After completing his studies, Marx wanted to become a professor. But because of his radical ideas, the government blacklisted him, meaning he was not allowed to teach at any university. Without a stable job, he turned to journalism. In 1842, Marx became the editor of a newspaper called Rheinische Zeitung, where he wrote articles criticizing the government, the economic system, and the struggles of workers. His writings were powerful and fearless, and soon the government shut down the newspaper. With no job and no future in Germany, Marx decided to move to Paris, the center of revolutionary ideas. In 1843, he and Jenny moved to France, where Marx met another person who would change his life forever: Friedrich Engels. Friedrich Engels was the son of a wealthy factory owner. But, unlike most rich men, he was deeply concerned about the poor working conditions of workers. He had spent time in England and had seen with his own eyes how industrial workers suffered in factories. When Engels met Marx in Paris, the two men realized they had the same vision to fight for the working class and to challenge the capitalist system. Engels supported Marx financially because Karl was always struggling with money. This partnership became one of the most famous intellectual collaborations in history. In Paris, Marx studied economics and history deeply. He read about past revolutions, economic systems, and class struggles. This was when he started developing the ideas that would later be known as Marxism. He believed that history was shaped by the conflict between two classes, the rich and the poor, the owners and the workers. He argued that capitalism, the system where businesses are privately owned, exploited workers and would eventually collapse. These ideas were radical and dangerous at the time. The French government saw Marx as a threat and expelled him from the country. In 1845, Marx and his family moved to Brussels, Belgium, where he continued his revolutionary work. This move was significant because Belgium at that time allowed greater freedom of speech and political activism compared to other European nations. Marx took full advantage of this environment and started writing extensively about his political and economic theories. One of the most defining moments in Karl Marx's life happened in Brussels: his deepening friendship with Friedrich Engels. Engels was a German philosopher, social scientist, and businessman who shared Marx's vision of a classless society. The two had met earlier in Paris, but it was in Brussels that their intellectual bond strengthened. Engels had first-hand experience of the working conditions in England, which he documented in his book, The Condition of the Working Class in England. His observations about factory workers, child labor, and economic exploitation deeply influenced Marx's ideas. Together, Marx and Engels decided to collaborate on a series of political writings. They saw capitalism as a system that benefited only a small class of wealthy elites, while oppressing the working majority. They wanted to develop a theory that would help workers understand their oppression and fight against it. Marx and Engels spent much of their time in Brussels working on the German ideology, a manuscript that laid the foundation for historical materialism, the idea that human history is shaped by material conditions, not ideas or religion. They argued that society is structured by economic forces, and that history is a series of struggles between different classes. This book was groundbreaking because it rejected the dominant philosophical ideas of the time, which focused on abstract ideas rather than material realities. Unfortunately, the German ideology was never published in Marx's lifetime, as no publisher wanted to take the risk of printing such a radical work. However, the ideas in this book would later influence countless socialist movements around the world. In Brussels, Marx also worked to unite socialist thinkers across Europe. He helped establish the Communist Correspondence Committee, which aimed to connect socialist groups and revolutionaries from different countries. His goal was to create an international movement that could fight against capitalism on a global scale. During this time, Marx also became deeply involved in practical political work. He gave speeches, wrote articles, and participated in meetings with workers and intellectuals. He wanted to spread his ideas beyond books and into real-world activism. His efforts started attracting the attention of governments, which saw him as a dangerous revolutionary. In 1847, Marx and Engels joined the Communist League, a small group of radical thinkers. The League asked them to write a manifesto that would explain their ideas in a clear and powerful way. The result was the Communist Manifesto, published in February 1848. This document became one of the most influential political texts in history. It begins with the famous line, "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism." Marx and Engels argued that, throughout history, societies had always been divided between oppressors and the oppressed. Under capitalism, the oppressors were the bourgeoisie, the rich business owners, then the oppressed were the proletariat, the working class. The manifesto called for workers to unite and overthrow the capitalist system. It proposed radical ideas such as the abolition of private property, progressive taxation, free education for all, and the centralization of banking. These ideas were shocking at the time, but they resonated with many workers who felt exploited by their employers. The year 1848 was a turning point in European history. Revolutions broke out in several countries, including France, Germany, and Italy. Inspired by the growing unrest, Marx actively participated in revolutionary activities. However, the Belgian government, fearing that he would incite a rebellion, expelled him from the country. Marx moved to Paris, but after a few months he was forced to leave again due to his political activities. He then moved to Cologne, Germany, where he launched a new radical newspaper, Neue Rheinische Zeitung. In his articles, he encouraged workers to demand better wages, shorter working hours, and more rights. He criticized the German government and the monarchy, which made him a target of state repression. By 1849, the revolutionary movements had failed, and conservative governments regained control across Europe. Marx was arrested and put on trial for his writings. Though he was acquitted, the government banned his newspaper and forced him to leave Germany once again. Marx and his family were homeless, with little money and nowhere to go. In 1849, Marx moved to London, where he would spend the rest of his life. London was a city of contrasts. While it was the center of global capitalism, it also had deep poverty and inequality. Marx found himself in a place where he could study the system he had been critiquing. But at the same time, he and his family suffered from severe financial hardship. Despite his reputation as a revolutionary thinker, Marx did not have financial security. He struggled to provide for his wife, Jenny, and their children. They lived in a small apartment in Soho, an area known for its poor living conditions. At times, Marx couldn't even afford basic necessities, and Jenny had to pawn their possessions. Tragically, 3 of their children died due to malnutrition and disease, a painful reality that deeply affected Marx. To survive, Marx relied heavily on his friend Friedrich Engels, who supported him financially. Engels, who worked in his family's textile business in Manchester, sent money to Marx regularly. Without this support, Marx might not have been able to continue his work. However, even with financial aid, Marx's life was marked by constant struggles. Despite his hardships, Marx continued his intellectual work. He spent countless hours at the British Museum's reading room, researching capitalism, economics, and history. His primary goal was to develop a comprehensive critique of capitalism. This led to his most significant work, Das Kapital. Das Kapital was not just a book, it was a detailed analysis of how capitalism functioned, why it led to inequality, and why Marx believed it would eventually collapse. He examined how workers were exploited under capitalism, arguing that they produced more value than they were paid for, and that capitalists, the owners of businesses, kept the extra value as profit. This idea became known as the theory of surplus value. To explain this in simple terms, imagine a factory worker who makes shoes. The worker's labor produces shoes worth $100, but the worker is only paid $30. The remaining $70 is taken by the factory owner as profit. Marx argued that this was exploitation because the worker was not receiving the full value of their labor. He believed that capitalism created a system where the rich, the bourgeoisie, would always grow wealthier, while workers, the proletariat, would continue to suffer. He predicted that workers would eventually unite and overthrow capitalism, creating a classless society. Even though he was living in poverty, Marx was still an active political figure. He became involved with the International Working Men's Association, also known as the First International, which aimed to unite workers across different countries. Through speeches, articles, and discussions, Marx spread his ideas and influenced socialist movements across Europe. However, Marx also faced opposition. Governments saw him as a dangerous revolutionary, and even some socialist groups disagreed with his approach. Many people found his writings too complex, and his theories were often misunderstood or misrepresented. Marx's personal life was filled with tragedy. His wife, Jenny, who had always supported him despite their struggles, suffered from illness. The death of their children caused immense grief. Marx himself developed health problems due to poor living conditions, stress, and overwork. He suffered from liver disease, boils, and insomnia. Despite these difficulties, Marx never stopped writing. He continued working on Das Kapital, but only the first volume was published during his lifetime. The later volumes were completed and published by Engels after Marx's death. By the 1860s, Karl Marx's influence had started to grow beyond small revolutionary circles. His ideas were beginning to spread across Europe, and he became increasingly involved in international socialist movements. Marx used the First International as a platform to promote his ideas. He wrote speeches, attended meetings, and debated other political thinkers. One of the biggest challenges was dealing with anarchists, particularly Mikhail Bakunin, who believed that workers should immediately abolish the state and replace it with local cooperatives. Marx, however, argued that the state had to be controlled by workers before it could be abolished. These ideological differences led to a major split within the First International, weakening the movement. Despite the conflicts, the First International helped spread Marx's ideas to workers in France, Germany, Italy, and Russia. His theory of class struggle resonated deeply with industrial workers who faced exploitation and poverty. Many socialist leaders of the future, including Vladimir Lenin, were inspired by Marx's work. During this period, while Marx's ideas were gaining traction, his personal life remained full of hardship. His financial struggles continued, and his health deteriorated. The stress of political work, combined with a lack of proper medical care, led to chronic illnesses. His wife, Jenny Marx, also suffered from poor health, and their children faced constant threats of starvation. One of the most tragic events in Marx's life was the loss of his son Edgar in 1855. Edgar was one of Marx's favorite children, and his death left Marx heartbroken. He became more withdrawn and depressed, but he continued writing and working despite his grief. After publishing the first volume of Das Kapital in 1867, Marx spent the next years working on the remaining volumes. However, he struggled to complete them due to his declining health and financial difficulties. His friend Friedrich Engels eventually compiled and edited the second and third volumes after Marx's death. The second volume focused on the circulation of capital, how money moves through different industries and markets. Marx analyzed how capitalists reinvest profits to maximize wealth. The third volume addressed profit, interest, and rent, explaining why capitalism leads to crises. These works were much more technical than the first volume, and they were not widely read at the time. However, they later became crucial texts for economists and revolutionaries. One of the most significant events influenced by Marx's ideas was the Paris Commune of 1871. After France was defeated in the Franco-Prussian War, the workers of Paris rebelled and took control of the city. They attempted to establish a government based on socialist principles. Marx saw the Paris Commune as proof that workers could govern themselves. However, the Commune was brutally crushed by the French government, and thousands of workers were killed. Marx analyzed the Commune's failure and argued that future revolutions needed better planning and organization. By the early 1870s, the First International began to collapse due to internal conflicts. The split between Marx and the anarchists weakened the movement. Additionally, many European governments were cracking down on socialist organizations, making it difficult for them to operate. In 1876, the First International officially disbanded. However, Marx's influence did not fade. Socialist parties began forming across Europe, and Marxist ideas continued to spread. In the last years of his life, Marx's health worsened. He suffered from lung disease and frequent illnesses. His wife, Jenny, passed away in 1881, which devastated him. On March 14, 1883, Karl Marx passed away in London at the age of 64. His funeral at Highgate Cemetery was a modest affair, attended by only a small group of friends and comrades. Engels delivered a eulogy, declaring that Marx had revolutionized the way we understand history and society. He stated, "Just as Darwin discovered the law of evolution in nature, so Marx discovered the law of evolution in human history." Although Marx's death marked the end of his personal struggles, his ideas continued to spread and influence the world. His works were translated into numerous languages, and socialist movements across Europe and beyond adopted Marxism as their guiding ideology. The legacy of Karl Marx. Marx's influence extended far beyond his lifetime. His theories laid the foundation for modern socialism and communism. In the 20th century, leaders such as Vladimir Lenin, Mao Zedong, and Fidel Castro used Marxist ideas to shape revolutionary movements in their countries. However, Marx's legacy is not without controversy. Some critics argue that Marxism, when implemented in practice, led to authoritarian regimes that betrayed the original vision of workers' liberation. Others believe that his critique of capitalism remains relevant, especially in analyzing issues like income inequality, labor exploitation, and economic crises. Today, Marx's ideas continue to inspire debates in economics, politics, and philosophy. His concept of class struggle remains a central theme in discussions about social justice. Universities, scholars, and activists still study his works to understand the complexities of capitalism and the possibilities for a more equitable society. Karl Marx's life was filled with hardships, intellectual battles, and an unwavering commitment to changing the world. He lived in poverty, faced political persecution, and lost many loved ones. Yet his ideas survived and shaped the course of history in ways he could not have imagined. Whether one sees him as a hero or a villain, there is no denying that Karl Marx was one of the most influential thinkers in history. His work continues to challenge, inspire, and provoke discussions about the future of society. On the day of his death, his close friend and comrade Friedrich Engels sat beside him. Engels later said, on the 14th of March, at 2:45 in the afternoon, the greatest living thinker ceased to think. Only 11 people attended his funeral at Highgate Cemetery in London. There was no grand ceremony, no large gathering, just a handful of loyal friends. However, Engels gave a powerful speech, saying, "His name will endure through the ages, and so also will his work." At that time, few people could have imagined how Karl Marx's ideas would change the world forever. Marx died without seeing his ideas succeed, but within a few decades, his writings began to shape history. In the 20th century, revolutions inspired by Marxism occurred in Russia, China, Cuba, and many other countries. However, Marxist ideas were also misinterpreted and misused. Some governments that claimed to follow Marxism became dictatorships, suppressing freedom rather than creating equality. Marx himself had never promoted violence or oppression, but his theories were used in ways he never intended. Despite the controversies, there are powerful lessons we can take from Karl Marx's life. 1. Never stop questioning the world around you. Marx was never satisfied with the world as it was. He asked deep questions about society, economy, and justice. We should also question unfair systems and think critically about the world. 2. Knowledge is power. Marx spent his life reading, writing, and learning. He believed that understanding history and economics could help people change their lives. If you want to succeed, never stop learning. 3. Even if you struggle, your ideas can change the world. Marx spent most of his life in poverty, but his ideas shaped history. Your current struggles don't define your future. If you have a powerful idea, keep working on it. Tip might change the world one day. 4. Money controls society, but it shouldn't control your mind. Marx saw how capitalism made people obsessed with money and profit. He warned that this could lead to exploitation and inequality. It's important to work hard, but don't let money become the only purpose in life. Karl Marx was a revolutionary thinker. Whether you see him as a hero or a villain, you cannot ignore his impact on history. His name is still debated today. Some call him a genius, others call him dangerous. But one thing is certain, he changed the way people think about society, class, and power. His words, his struggles, and his sacrifices prove that one person's ideas can shape the future, even after death. That is why Karl Marx remains one of the most important figures in human history. If you've watched this far, you now understand Karl Marx's full journey, his struggles, his ideas, and his legacy. But his story isn't just about history, it's about how we see the world today. If you enjoyed this detailed series, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more amazing and powerful stories that will help you learn, think, and grow. And remember, never stop questioning, never stop learning, and never stop believing that your ideas can change the world.